Welcome, everyone. So glad you could join us for today's study. What we're doing today is presenting a full summary of Chuck Missler's teachings on eschatology, drawing all our insights straight from Koinonia House. Definitely be sure to mention the source channel, and a link is below in the description box. If you enjoyed jumping into these deep dive topics with us, give a hype and like, please. And as always, prayers for the Watchmen channels are very much appreciated. Okay, let's unpack this massive timeline of future events exactly as laid out in the source material and make sure we don't miss those tiny details that usually slip through the cracks.
Here is the roadmap for our study. We're going to cover 1. The end times framework, 2. Identifying the Antichrist, 3. The rapture examined, 4. The Great Tribulation, and 5. The final judgments. This chronological map is going to calmly take what is honestly a very dense timeline and make it completely clear.
Section 1. The End Times Framework.
Okay, the absolute key to unlocking this whole thing is Daniel's prophecy of the 70 weeks. Think of it like a highly precise prophetic clock. The first 69 weeks of years ran their course and concluded exactly when the Messiah was cut off or executed. But because the 70th week, that final 7-year stretch, hasn't happened yet, this framework argues that we are currently living right inside a historical gap, an interval. The destruction of the temple in 70 AD happened after the 69th week, but before the 70th week even began. So we're literally sitting in the middle of a massive, ongoing pause.
Now you might be wondering, is this gap just some fringe idea? Actually, no. This specific interval is implied 24 distinct times throughout the biblical text. It's this hidden structural element, the age of the church, and it's stretched for nearly 2,000 years so far. It acts as an uncounted interval that has to fully conclude before that final 70th week can finally kick off.
Section 2. Identifying the Antichrist.
So who ends the interval? You know, the term Antichrist is actually kind of clumsy. It's barely even used in Revelation. Instead, the Old Testament gives us over 30 different titles for this coming world leader. One of the big ones is the Assyrian, which totally hints at his geopolitical origins, but my personal favorite, Mr. Big Mouth. Across passages like Daniel 7 and Revelation 13, his absolute defining characteristic is his mouth. He's an oratorical genius making insanely arrogant, boastful claims that just completely captivate the globe. And check this out. There's a truly fascinating physical description in Zechariah chapter 11. It suggests that this leader, called the idol shepherd here, suffers a severe, seemingly fatal wound. When he emerges from it, he bears physical scars, specifically a blinded right eye and a totally impaired, dried-up arm. It's an incredibly precise detail, right? It might even tie into exactly how his followers physically mark their allegiance to him later on.
But, importantly, this guy isn't a solo act. It's a duet. This political and military genius operates alongside a second figure, a religious leader known as the false prophet. The second beast performs literal, undeniable miracles. I mean, we're talking calling fire down from heaven. And he does it for one sole purpose, to demand global worship of that first leader.
Section 3. The Rapture examined. Okay, so we know the 70th week is coming, but what happens to believers before the clock restarts? Before that week begins, the texts detail an event called the Harpazo. That's the original Greek term for rapture, and it literally translates to being snatched up forcibly or caught away. In this framework, it's an imminent translation of believers from the earth. There are 0 signs required, no warning bells. It could happen suddenly at any given moment.
And this brilliantly highlights a strict distinction between two events that people mix up all the time. The rapture and the second coming are completely separate, non-overlapping events. Just look at the differences. In the rapture, Christ meets believers in the air, there are no preceding signs, and he comes for his own to protect them. The second coming? That happens after the tribulation. Christ comes all the way down to the earth following a highly predictable signs, and he comes with his own to conquer. Blurring these two together is exactly what causes so much confusion.
Section 4. The Great Tribulation. So let's map out that final 7-year period, Daniel's 70th week. It kicks off the moment the world leader, our Mr. Big Mouth, enforces a peace treaty that actually allows a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. But right at the 3.5-year mark, the exact midpoint, he violently breaks that treaty. That specific betrayal plunges the entire world into the final 42 months. It's a period of unprecedented global hardship that Jesus himself specifically labeled the Great Tribulation.
The exact act that shatters the treaty is known as the abomination of desolation. It's the ultimate insult.
He demands global worship by placing an idol, an image of himself, which the false prophet actually empowers to speak, right in the rebuilt temple. This is the absolute pivot point. It slices those 7 years precisely in half, shifting the world from a false sense of peace into absolute, unmitigated catastrophe.
But even in this incredibly dark time, God doesn't go totally silent. 2 witnesses will appear in Jerusalem. Now, people debate their identities endlessly, but this study strongly points to Moses and Elijah. Why? Well, look at their powers. Shutting the skies so it won't rain, turning water to blood, smiting the earth with plagues. Those are the exact, highly unique miracles tied directly to the ministries of Moses and Elijah back in the Old Testament.
Which brings up a massive question. Does the church have to go through the Great Tribulation? Based on the letters to the churches in Revelation, the argument here is an emphatic, absolute no. The church is expressly exempted from this specific time of wrath. The Harpazo we talked about earlier ensures that believers are simply not on earth while this intense judgment is poured out.
Section 5. The Final Judgments.
As the 70th week concludes, the Great Tribulation reaches its boiling point at a literal geographic location, Armageddon. This is it, the true second coming. Unlike the Rapture, this isn't a secret catching away. The heavens literally open, and Christ returns physically to the earth on a white horse. He's accompanied by his saints, and he completely defeats the world leader and the false prophet, tossing them directly into the lake of fire.
Following that ultimate victory, the sequence moves straight into the millennium. We're talking about a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth while Satan is completely bound. Then, at the very end of those 1,000 years, Satan is briefly released. He sparks one final rebellion, which is instantly and permanently crushed, and then history steps over the threshold into eternity. A new heaven, a new earth, and the New Jerusalem descending.
Now, across this whole timeline, there are 3 distinct judgments, and honestly, people mistakenly lump them together all the time. First, you have the Bema Seat of Christ. This happens in heaven right after the rapture, and it's strictly an evaluation of believers for rewards. It has nothing to do with salvation. Second is the sheep and goat judgment. That happens on earth right after Armageddon, judging the mortal survivors based on what they did during the tribulation. And third is the great white throne judgment. This one waits until the very end of the millennium, and it is the final judgment reserved specifically for the unsaved dead. The timing and the audience vary drastically for every single one of them.
To wrap up this full summary, the source material leaves us with a highly provocative thought. If I know your hermeneutics, I know your eschatology. Basically, exactly how you choose to read and interpret the biblical text, whether you take it literally or allegorically, is going to completely shape your view of the future. The goal here isn't just to memorize a prophecy chart, it's to dig deeply into the original text for yourself. So, what are your hermeneutics? How does your reading of the text shape your understanding of the days ahead? Thank you so much for exploring this with us. Remember to check out the Source channel. A link is below in the description box. See you next time.